Some officials have actually described Tren de Aragua as MS-13 on steroids, a reference to the infamous Salvadorian gang. Tren de Aragua is a Venezuelan prison gang, which in large part was seen to be contained in South America.
Axios White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller and DHS Secretary Kristi Noem orchestrated this plan, with few outside of their team.
Just after 3:25 p.m., deep in a barren desert corridor, a steel snake crept through the heat like it owned the place. An armored convoy stretched for miles under a blistering sun, inching forward while every mile ahead had already been mapped, monitored, and marked in secret. Around 300 vehicles loaded with heavy weapons, fuel, and contraband rolled through empty sands. More than a smuggling run, this was a roaming armory built to scare governments and rivals alike. They weren't just moving goods. They were flexing power, fronted by the Venezuelan crew known as the Dua Gang, a group so big it moved like a traveling fortress. The word in the air was official. The U.S. government had tagged the network as a foreign terrorist organization amid rising fears of cross-border drug and arms trafficking. For days, U.S. satellites and drones watched every shift in formation like hawks, tracking heat signatures, spacing, and timing down to the minute. Analysts had the exact truck count, the routes, even which rigs carried anti-aircraft guns and slapped on improvised armor meant to shrug off ambushes. The whole column looked tight on camera, but the plan riding on them was tighter. What nobody could pin down was the moment the jaws would close, until the lead vehicle jolted, froze, and blew into a fireball without warning. Flames punched the sky, and the shock ripped straight down the line, flipping discipline into panic in seconds. This wasn't a lucky hit or a random dust-up. This was cold, surgical timing with a playbook built to break a moving war chest. What came next would reset the rules on how America's most elite operators take on organized criminal power far from home, mixing stealth, speed, and precision into one ruthless hit that left the desert whispering. In the months before the desert ambush, U.S. intelligence watched a quiet storm rise from the underworld, a threat that started as whispers and ended in satellite alerts. What once began decades ago as a ragtag prison gang in Venezuela, known as Tren de Aragua, had evolved into a violent powerhouse with reach that scared even seasoned agents. By February 20th, 2025, Washington had seen enough. The U.S. State Department officially stamped Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization, locking it on the same blacklist as the world's most feared cartels and syndicates. That move alone sent a loud message. Their growing empire across Latin America and creeping influence inside U.S. borders wasn't going to be ignored anymore. The group's roots dug deep in Tocaron prison, a place that once held petty criminals but turned into a breeding ground for a new kind of empire. Over the years, Tren de Aragua spread like wildfire through Central America, setting up shadow cells involved in drug trafficking, extortion, kidnapping, and brutal violence. Their control ran through ports, jungle routes, and urban strongholds, where money and fear walked hand in hand. One name rose above the rest: Giovanni Vicente Mosqueda Serrano, a boss so infamous he landed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, with multi-million-dollar rewards hanging over his head for anyone bold enough to betray him. The U.S. wasn't just watching, they were hunting. Every sanction, every intel hit, and every raid showed how serious the threat had become. Yet, despite the spotlight, Tren de Arua's core operations still lurked in the shadows, guarded by silence, loyalty, and heavy firepower. The convoy that would later burn in the desert wasn't some random run. It was, according to defense insiders, the group's biggest armed movement ever caught on radar. Dozens of combat-ready trucks, fuel haulers, and crates packed with weapons and contraband rolled toward new black markets stretching from the Caribbean to the Deep South, marking the start of a showdown no one saw coming. The size of that convoy was jaw-dropping. It showed how a gang once whispered about behind Venezuelan prison bars had exploded into a transnational powerhouse, moving hundreds of fighters and tons of gear across open land like ghosts. No border checkpoints, no radar pings, no interference, just raw mobility fueled by money, muscle, and fear. The route they picked wasn't random. It was genius on paper. They cut through an endless stretch of desert, a no-man's land where even the wind seemed to mind its own business. Few civilians, no patrols, no police chatter. For Tren Dewa's commanders, it was the perfect blind spot, a hidden artery built for smuggling and control. But what they didn't know was that the blind spot wasn't blind anymore. US surveillance had already slipped in long before the first truck even touched the sand. For weeks, satellites and stealth drones floated high above, locking onto every heat signature, every dust trail, and every flicker of movement. Each turn, stop, and acceleration was recorded, dissected, and mapped by analysts sitting thousands of miles away, tracking the convoy like a predator circling prey. These analysts weren't guessing. They knew the exact number of trucks, the types of weapons inside, and even the fuel load each vehicle carried. They knew which trucks had improvised armor and which ones were decoys. Inside the convoy, commanders thought they were wrapped in secrecy, hidden by distance and terrain, but in truth, they were fully exposed. Their illusion of safety was nothing more than a mirage shimmering in the heat. By the time those engines roared into the heart of the desert, the US already had eyes on every inch of it. This wasn't luck. It was patient, high-tech stalking. The invisible route they trusted had already turned into a glowing trail on American surveillance screens. The silence they believed was cover had flipped on them, because while they looked at the horizon, the sky was already watching. The real star behind the curtain of this surveillance wasn't a spy in a van or a man in the sky. It was the MQ-9 Reaper drone, a silent predator built for patience and precision. This long-endurance machine could hover for hours, circling an area like a ghost with eyes sharper than any satellite. While satellites glide by on fixed orbits, the Reaper plays by its own rules. It can circle, drift, and refocus over a moving target, delivering an unbroken view that feels almost supernatural. Packed with next-gen sensors, the Reaper doesn't just watch, it studies. Its high-resolution cameras and infrared imaging draw a perfect contrast between the cool desert sand and the blazing heat of running engines or stacked weapons. That difference was everything, because to the analysts glued to their screens, it wasn't just about counting trucks. They were reading the body language of a convoy. They could tell which rigs hugged tight in formation, hinting at command or protection roles. They saw which ones carried extra fuel, revealed by their glowing heat signatures and heavy movement. They marked the armored platforms and weapon mounts that gleamed bright against the lighter transport trucks. What looked like chaos to outsiders unfolded before them as an organized ecosystem, a convoy with structure, discipline, and rank. Day and night, the Reaper's unblinking eye stayed locked on them. Every curve, stop, and adjustment fed into a live data stream pulsing back to intelligence centers thousands of miles away. Inside those war rooms, specialists stitched together images, heat maps, and movement logs into a living, breathing map that evolved by the hour. No guessing, no maybes, just cold data shaping a crystal-clear narrative of who these people were and how they operated. Whenever the formation shifted or a distinct heat signature revealed a likely command vehicle, it was flagged, labeled, and tracked. Nothing was left to chance. This wasn't an accidental watch. It was deliberate, methodical patience at work. In operations like this, impulse is a weakness. Patience is power. A premature strike could scatter the convoy before the deeper story came to light. Their tactics, their choke points, their weak spots. So, the Reaper kept circling, calm and relentless, collecting every flicker of movement, every pattern, every clue. The analysts didn't want a single snapshot. They wanted the entire movie. Each frame revealed intent, rhythm, and coordination. And with every rotation of that silent drone, the US built not just a target list, but a psychological blueprint of the convoy itself. Every heartbeat of heat, every mile of motion, every subtle shift, it all mattered. Analysts watched every inch of movement like it was a language of its own. They noticed how certain trucks avoided steep slopes, proof they were overloaded with cargo too heavy to risk tipping. Others stuck together in tight formation, classic command and protection units, guarding the center like a moving fortress. Bit by bit, this living map turned into a rhythm, a predictable pulse of movement. From that rhythm, military planners could forecast where the convoy would speed up, where it would drag, and exactly where it would be most exposed to a coordinated strike. Every mile, every pause, every hesitation meant something. By the time the convoy crawled into that empty desert corridor, the one that would soon erupt in fire, U.S. intelligence wasn't guessing anymore. They were certain. The route was mapped down to the meter, the timing nailed, the weaknesses pinpointed. Nothing was left to chance. The biggest twist? The convoy thought they were invisible, but they'd been walking in full view the whole time. The open desert they trusted for freedom had betrayed them. The sky they counted on for cover had become their greatest enemy. Trading the shadows of the jungle for open sky made them easier to track than ever before. What they believed was isolation was actually perfect visibility, a trap designed with intention, patience, and precision tech that never blinked. The Americans had spent days building an invisible cage of data and surveillance, and the convoy had driven right into the center of it. For days, the Reaper drones circled, feeding live updates to command rooms. Operators watched the convoy's pulse flatten out on their screens as it rolled into the wide-open stretch, the kill zone. But one question hung in the air like static. When would the United States strike? How would they pick that single second to crush the convoy before anyone could scatter? The answer came quietly, almost eerily. The terrain began to flatten. The road thinned into a long, exposed vein of dirt, and the column stretched itself dangerously thin, exactly as planners predicted. Hidden up on the ridgelines overlooking the path, Navy SEAL teams were already waiting, having slipped into position under the cover of darkness hours earlier. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just watched through scopes, heartbeat steady, waiting for the silent signal that would turn the still desert into a storm. The convoy was caught out in the open, a perfect setup for a takedown. Surrounded by flat, lifeless terrain and nowhere to run, the scene looked almost staged, a natural cage built for containment, not chaos. At 1:52 p.m. local time, the trap slammed shut. But the first strike didn't target the fighters. It went for the convoy's nervous system. Precision fire locked onto the lead trucks, smashing them in seconds and grinding the entire line to a halt. Engines died, brakes screamed, and armored rigs rammed into each other or swerved helplessly into the sand. In a blink, that long, confident column dissolved into a tangled mess of confusion and fire. This was no random shootout. It was textbook special operations. U.S. doctrine is clear. Stop the movement before you stop the men. Reports from outlets like Reuters and Defense News have long detailed this method from past SEAL missions in the Middle East. Disabling mobility before engagement keeps chaos under control. By crippling the lead and tail vehicles, the Americans turned the desert highway into a metal trap. No exits, no regrouping, no second chances. Then came the next wave, electronic warfare. In an instant, every radio inside the convoy went dead. Static swallowed their comms. The satellite phones that once buzzed with updates went completely silent. The convoy's digital lifeline was gone. The modern jamming systems, according to Reuters reporting, are built to cut off command and control right at the moment of contact, breaking coordination before a single extra bullet flies. What followed was pure disarray. Hundreds of armed fighters suddenly blind and deaf, with no way to call, regroup, or even understand what had just hit them. Truck commanders yelled into dead radios. Gunners spun their turrets toward invisible threats, and drivers stumbled out, running into open sand without a clue where safety lay. Some tried to reverse, but the path was blocked with wreckage and burning fuel. Others charged forward into what they thought was escape, only to find the road ahead already sealed. With comms destroyed and no chain of command left, rumors replaced orders, and panic spread faster than any explosion. The once proud convoy, 300 trucks strong, had become a maze of smoke, fear, and isolation. Each fighter now faced the same grim truth. The desert that promised freedom had become their cage. Was this an airstrike, a rival gang ambush, or something else entirely? The truth was far worse. The power of this attack wasn't just in bullets or bombs, it was in confusion itself. That uncertainty became a weapon, twisting fear into paralysis and making every move from the US forces 10 times more effective. From the high ridgelines, Navy SEAL operators watched through long-range optics and live drone feeds, calmly observing the chaos below. Everything was unfolding exactly according to plan. There was no panic to push forward, no rush to unleash heavy fire. Control was the mission, not speed. Every passing minute tightened the trap, deepening the convoy's disarray and crushing any chance of an organized counterattack. Intelligence analysts later said this patience reflected lessons from earlier large-scale interdictions, where restraint, not aggression, brought cleaner, more decisive results. As documented in Defense Department after-action reviews, those who waited for the perfect moment often walked away with minimal fallout and maximum success. What made this phase brutal wasn't the size of the explosion, it was the silence. No thunderous barrage, no roaring aircraft, just the eerie sound of stalled engines, crackling fires, and distant static from dead radios. The convoy had rolled into the desert thinking its isolation was its shield, but now that same emptiness had flipped on them. Their freedom had become a cage, and there was no one left to call for help. Pinned between burning wrecks and endless sand, fighters scrambled to make sense of the invisible attack. Some yelled into dead radios, others fired wildly into the horizon, desperate to hit something, anything. But there was nothing to shoot at. They were cut off, surrounded by silence, their formation broken, their leadership vanished into the smoke. Isolation, once their strength, had become the weapon that destroyed them. From the command centers miles away, US analysts watched in real time as confusion spread like wildfire. The convoy wasn't just halted, it was psychologically shattered. With comms jammed, leadership fragmented, and terrain offering no escape, they were trapped in plain sight. Every minute that passed drained their organization, their courage, their will to fight. Then, as the dust began to settle, the sky itself turned hostile. The same desert air that had seemed calm and harmless just moments before now hummed with danger. From above, US Air Force aircraft began to enter the fight, silent at first, then unmistakable. Precision engines sliced through the haze, and targeting systems locked on with ruthless accuracy. The second phase of the operation had begun, and this time there would be no confusion about what was coming next. The sky that once promised safety had transformed into the most dangerous place imaginable, and for the fighters trapped below, there was nowhere left to hide. The goal wasn't to unleash blind destruction, it was to dismantle the convoy piece by piece with cold precision. According to US Air Force operational doctrine, air power doesn't rush in guns blazing. It steps in only after ground movement and communication have been crippled, making sure every strike lands with maximum impact and zero confusion. This approach, outlined in multiple Air Force fact sheets and after-action reports, turns chaos into control. Every bomb, every missile, part of a surgical plan. The first aircraft to break the silence were the F-15E Strike Eagles, deep strike beasts built for precision and speed. These weren't random passes. They were targeted hits aimed straight at the convoy's lifelines, not its fighters. Moments later, guided bombs dropped clean from the sky, locking onto fuel trucks scattered along the column. The impact was instant. Massive fireballs tore upward, shaking the ground and rolling waves of flame across the desert floor. Reuters reporting on modern US air campaigns has long highlighted this tactic. Take out the fuel, and the fight collapses. Without gas, armored vehicles turn into dead weight, and escape becomes nothing but a dream. Within minutes, the open desert transformed into a blazing trap, a maze of fire, smoke, and twisted metal. The flames climbed stories high, the heat was unbearable, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Fighters inside the chaos stumbled through the haze, disoriented and choking on dust and smoke. Trucks caught in the middle were boxed in by infernos on both sides. too close to move, too far to help. Every explosion sparked another, as secondary blasts ripped through tightly packed vehicles, one after another. The convoy that once rolled with swagger and structure was now shattered into scattered pockets of panic. Each group fought to understand what was happening while the world around them burned. Radios were dead, engines useless, and the air thick with confusion and fear. Then the sound changed. A deep, thunderous growl cut through the smoke. Out of the shimmering sky, 10 warthogs swooped in low, their presence impossible to mistake. Built for close-range ground attack, their very sound made hearts drop. The warthogs weren't there for show. They were there to finish the job. With cannons ready and sensors locked, the sky that had once looked empty now roared with purpose, turning the battlefield into a furnace of precision and fear. According to U.S. Air Force field documentation, few aircraft can shred armored convoys like the A-10 Thunderbolt II, better known as the Warthog. Its brutal accuracy makes it perfect for smashing moving targets while keeping friendly forces safe from friendly fire. These beasts are made for controlled chaos, deadly precision at low altitude, especially when the mission demands accuracy over destruction. As the A-10s dropped in low, their cannons roared to life. Streams of fire ripped through armored SUVs and weapon-mounted trucks, turning metal into sparks. Each strike was targeted and deliberate, focusing only on vehicles still capable of movement or mounting resistance. No wasted shots, no random fire, just cold, surgical precision. Every pass stripped away another layer of the convoy's strength, breaking its rhythm and choking off any chance of regrouping. But this wasn't just muscle from the sky. It was intelligence in motion. Overhead, unmanned drones fed real-time video straight to the pilots and command centers below. These flying eyes watched every movement, every plume of smoke, every shift in formation. Through that non-stop feed, 10 pilots received second-by-second updates, adjusting fire patterns mid-mission to match the chaos unfolding below. This seamless coordination between manned aircraft and drones showed how far modern warfare had evolved. As U.S. military reports explain, real-time data sharing means every pilot can pivot instantly. No wasted bombs, no blind shots. Targets changed as fast as the battlefield did, ensuring that every hit counted and nothing critical slipped through the cracks. The logic behind the attack was ruthless, but brilliant. The Air Force didn't go straight for the fighters. They took out mobility first. By wiping out the fuel trucks and armored vehicles, they left the convoy stranded and exposed. Fighters without transport can't maneuver, can't retreat, and can't fight as a unit. What remained was a force stuck in the sand, trapped between walls of fire and under constant watch from above. But here's the real twist. The destruction wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Every time a fighter tried to move, they risked instant detection. Every attempt to regroup lit up on drone sensors like a flare in the night. The more they tried to escape, the more the sky itself hunted them. What once felt like open freedom had become a sealed dome of danger. The horizon offered no way out, and the silence above carried more fear than any explosion. As the smoke thickened and the flames devoured the desert floor, one truth became clear. The convoy's fate wasn't being decided by what it could see, but by what it couldn't. As fire tore through the sky and molten steel rained down from above, one brutal question suddenly outweighed all others. Could anyone still escape? The convoy was crippled, its engines dead, its formation shattered, but maybe, just maybe, someone could still make it out on the ground. Yet as the fires raged brighter and the air turned to smoke and heat, that faint hope began to die fast. It became painfully clear. There was no way out. The convoy had lost its shape, its momentum, and its direction. Trucks burned in clusters, engines cracked from heat, and the line that once stretched for miles was now a jagged trail of wreckage. But the final trap hadn't even been sprung yet. That came when the escape routes began to disappear, one after another. Ahead and behind, key roads and passes were cut off in seconds, detonations ripping through the sand, blocking every exit. Using pre-placed explosives and long-range strikes, U.S. forces slammed the final door shut. Roads that seemed open moments before were suddenly buried under craters, overturned vehicles, and smoldering debris. According to Department of Defense briefings on large-scale interdiction missions, this is the final critical phase. Seal the escape corridors before panic turns to flight. Don't chase the enemy. Trap them, contain them, crush their will to move. The result was devastating. With movement cut off in all directions, the convoy began to collapse inward on itself, panic spiraling faster than the flames. Vehicles at the center burned hottest, their fuel tanks exploding one after another, feeding a wall of fire that spread like a living thing. Drivers near the edge ditched their rides and tried to sprint into the open desert, but the endless sand offered no cover, no direction, no mercy. Those who ran were easy to spot from above, tiny figures scattering under the drone's unblinking eye. Some trucks tipped over after sharp, desperate turns. Others stalled, their tanks bone dry and their tires buried in the sand. A few were left abandoned mid-route, doors swinging open, engines dead, weapons tossed aside. Discipline was gone. Fear ruled the desert now. What had once been an organized, unstoppable convoy had turned into a graveyard of steel and smoke, stretching across the barren landscape like the skeleton of an empire that thought it couldn't fall. The silence between explosions felt heavier than the fire itself. Overhead, the sky shimmered with heat, and drones hovered like silent witnesses, the last eyes watching a force that no longer existed as one. Then came the phase that sealed the desert completely. Low-altitude control turned into total dominance. The deep roar of helicopters cut through the smoke as they swooped in, skimming just meters above the scorched ground. Their arrival wasn't about spectacle or shock, it was about absolute control. From that height, every movement, every shadow, every attempt to run was visible and tracked in real time. According to U.S. military reports on counterterrorism air tactics, helicopters serve as a mobile wall, able to hover, pivot, and strike faster than any ground unit could ever hope to react. That's exactly what unfolded here. Every small cluster of fighters that tried to scatter found themselves instantly spotted, pursued, and pinned. The sky had closed in. There was nowhere left to hide. Once the airspace was fully locked down and every possible escape route sealed, Navy SEAL teams began their advance. Moving cautiously through smoke, wreckage, and burning metal, they picked their way down the ruined column with tactical precision. Each movement was deliberate, slow, silent, and calculated. This was no longer about chaos or dominance. It was about accuracy and control. According to Reuters coverage on past U.S. Special Operations raids, when intelligence value is high, capture outweighs elimination. And that's exactly what the SEALs were after. Their mission had shifted from destruction to extraction, to find the key players behind the entire operation, the command figures, the money handlers, and the logistics brains who had built the route from the shadows. Through wrecked vehicles and drifting smoke, the operators hunted systematically. Their infrared scopes cut through the haze, picking up movement that the naked eye could never see. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for, the high-ranking figures separated from their protection and stripped of communication. These were the men who had once called the shots, now reduced to silence, hiding behind overturned trucks and scorched sandbags. The capture was quick and clean. Several key leaders were taken into custody, their devices, documents, and encrypted drives seized on the spot. The intel they carried was worth more than any single strike that day. It was the blueprint of an empire built on fear, money, and global connections. As helicopters held their positions overhead and the SEALs secured the ground below, the desert that had once echoed with engines now stood quiet, a battlefield turned evidence site, sealed under American control. What lay scattered across the sand was no longer a threat. It was a gold mine of intelligence. That distinction was everything. Modern U.S. military strategy doesn't see missions like this as just shootouts. It treats them as information wars. Blowing up trucks and weapons cripples a group for a moment, but data, that's what destroys it for good. Every shattered phone, every burned-out laptop, Every GPS unit and logbook left behind could map out the organization's veins, supply routes, money trails, safe houses, even corrupt officials tied into their network. According to defense analysts cited in multiple post-operation reviews, the intelligence pulled from scenes like this often fuels months or even years of follow-up missions across borders. Every byte of data becomes a breadcrumb leading straight to the next takedown. As the last fires burned themselves out, the desert began to slip back into silence. The heat shimmered over charred wrecks and blackened metal, where just hours ago engines had roared and radios had crackled with confidence. Now there was only stillness, a battlefield frozen in defeat. The story written in the sand was brutal and clear. Confidence had turned into chaos, power into vulnerability. The convoy had entered this open wasteland believing that space and isolation would protect it, that freedom of movement meant freedom from detection. Instead, that same emptiness became its undoing. The desert didn't hide them. It exposed every weakness, every move, every mistake. From above, the US had turned their safe zone into a live trap where visibility meant death. As SEAL teams wrapped up their final sweeps and helicopters maintained overwatch, one chilling question lingered over the ruins. What's more dangerous to a network like this? The weapons lost in a single afternoon, or the secrets quietly carried away? Because what US forces left with wasn't just evidence, it was leverage, intelligence that could topple what was left of the Dua gang from the inside out. When the smoke finally cleared, the full scale of the operation became impossible to ignore. Over 200 vehicles lay wrecked, scorched, or abandoned, the entire convoy erased in just a few hours. The desert that had once carried one of the largest criminal arsenals in modern history now looked like a scrapyard of defeat. Hundreds of armed fighters had been either captured or killed, their once mighty force reduced to silence and smoldering wreckage. Yet, perhaps the most striking part of it all was what didn't happen. No reported American casualties, not one. According to defense reports cited by Reuters on recent US counter-network operations, that fact alone revealed the true brilliance behind the mission's design. It wasn't about overpowering, it was about outsmarting. Every move had been calculated, every strike deliberate, every risk measured to ensure dominance without chaos. By the time the last drone circled out of view, the message was undeniable. The Dua gang had been crushed not by firepower alone, but by patience, intelligence, and precision. And somewhere deep in a command room miles away, analysts were already digging into the seized data, turning what was once a battlefield into the blueprint for the next strike still to come. This wasn't just about firepower, it was about absolute control. From the very first moment satellites locked onto that convoy to the final sweep through the smoke and wreckage, the operation proved one thing with chilling precision. Patience, coordination, and technology can crush even the largest threat without letting chaos spill beyond the battlefield. The United States didn't need grand speeches or flashy announcements. There were no camera-ready statements, no cinematic moments, only results. Every move, every strike, every decision spoke for itself. When intelligence, air power, and special operations move as one, even the most confident criminal networks can be silently dismantled, far from home and far from headlines. But make no mistake, the story doesn't end here in the desert. History has shown again and again that powerful organizations don't just vanish, they adapt. Their roots shift underground, their tactics evolve, and the cycle begins again with new faces and new methods. Officials from the Department of Justice and State Department have warned that groups like Trend Dua are not fixed targets. They're moving systems, always changing shape, always searching for their next blind spot to exploit. That's the unsettling truth. This was just one convoy in one remote corner of open land. So the question now is, how many more are out there? How many other operations are unfolding quietly, just beyond what the public ever sees? Somewhere, right now, another shadow convoy might already be on the move, and another pair of American eyes could be watching from above. Share what you think in the comments below. Was this a turning point, or just another chapter in an endless cycle? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Military Power for deeper dives into the real stories shaping modern warfare, covert missions, and the unseen strategies driving today's conflicts. We report only what's relevant to the public, never to speculate or intrude into anyone's private life. Everything we present is for entertainment, education, and informed commentary. Because the truth of global conflict isn't just in what's said openly, but in what happens quietly, behind the lines, where the world's most powerful forces play their hidden games.